Hi, everybody. This is Selena with Connecticut Common Sense, and I'm here with Sheila with Able Child. And today we are going to talk about medical freedom in Connecticut. And I'm really looking forward to what Sheila has to say because she is way ahead of me on this issue. So I hope to learn something. So, Sheila, why don't you tell us about what you're doing and maybe how you got started in this? What sparked your interest in this area?
Sure. First, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. Connecticut is close and dear to my heart. It is where Able Child started with another mom from the state of New York. So I had two children. I still do, thank God, two boys. And when my son was about 7 years old, he was very energetic and loved school, was very talkative. You either loved him or couldn't stand him, and so of course I loved him and still do. And so I found myself in a situation with the school where they basically were killing his spirit, and he was coming home very sad.
Hmm.
And then they started telling me that he had attention deficit disorder, which I knew nothing about. I was handed a bunch of paperwork that was very pro-drug. Try, if one drug doesn't work, try another drug. And he was 7 and he was very tiny. And I was really frightened. My pediatrician never said anything to me. And, it wasn't until I entered school with him that I had this. So that's how I got started. And then I was actually prepping for a meeting with the school in New Canaan, Connecticut, very affluent town. And the night before I turned on C-SPAN, I saw a mother from Millwood, New York. I almost forgot where she lived at the time. And she was testifying before Congress about how she was pressured to put her son on Paxil, and she didn't recognize him and she wanted him off the drug. And then they said he wasn't allowed to come to school any longer. So the next day I was meeting with my team, and a lot of parents out there, they still haven't changed the lingo. It's like a PPT meeting or a team meeting. And I called Congress, I got her number, and I decided to listen to what she had to say. And she was like, there's no such thing as attention deficit disorder. And I was like, really? And I had no idea what she was talking about, but I trusted this mother because she had been through it. So I went to the school and I said, I don't believe in this. This is not what I want for my son. And that's how Able Child was launched. We
Mhm.
got together and we decided to start a nonprofit called ablechild.org.
And when was that? When did that happen?
2001.
Okay. Okay. So you've been at this for a while now.
Many, many years, more so than I'd like to talk about. But, it's the sad thing is that it's still, no matter how much media I do, the policies remain the same.
Hmm.
Yes, Able Child has had some wins. Our mission is informed consent. So
Hmm.
basically, what that means is that parents deserve all the information before they place their child or even an adult on any of these psychiatric drugs or any drugs. Okay, so it's basically informed consent.
Mhm.
And so that's our mission. And over the years, we've had some really great wins. And one of them was the prohibition on mandatory medication in public schools. That's because of Patty Weathers' case and her story.
Mhm.
And so that's a huge win for parents across the country.
Tell us about that.
Sure. So basically, because she no longer wanted to continue with the forced drugging of her son because she was told this was her only option. You have to put him on this drug in order for him to attend school.
Wow.
She went to Congress, and she also, with my help, helped, file a lawsuit against the school. And so this law prevents schools from saying, if you choose not to put your child on a psychiatric drug, they can't tell you that you're no longer allowed to have your child at school.
Okay.
So it's a huge, win for parents.
Okay. So how has that evolved? What is because it sounds like it started with ADD, and I know you're working with some other things now as well, because certainly we've had some evolution in what we're giving our children.
Well, it started for me with ADHD and the subjective nature of it. Like that's part of informed consent. Parents aren't told that a group of psychiatrists basically voted it in, that there's no blood tests, there's no brain scans,
Mm-hmm.
there's no way that they can determine whether your child has that. So it's research. So that led Able Child into, in Connecticut, my next step after working with Patty on that was working in foster care. Because when we went to go testify on the first bill that became federal law, we met a lot of parents who had their children taken by the state. So
Wow.
it was a little different, okay, where the school is saying you can't have your child come here unless he's on these psych drugs. Okay, that we stopped. But they were still taking children, and they still do today. And you talk about medical freedom, is that if you say, I don't want to place my child on these psychiatric drugs, the state can come and take your child for medical neglect
Wow.
and
Huh.
hold the child and drug the child.
Wow. And this is Connecticut. Is it this also New York as well? Is this both?
This
Is this
this
just
is
everywhere?
actually, I'm sorry, this is throughout the country still now.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Did not
Mhm.
know that.
So basically, this becomes a big problem for human rights,
Uh-huh.
as well as, it's really a corruption issue. So you have these vendors, okay? They're behavioral health vendors that have huge contracts with the states, not only Connecticut, but throughout the country.
Okay.
And they're behavioral health contracts. So the more children that they get onto the psych drugs, the more money they make.
Got it.
Okay. And if they're trapped within the system of foster care, you you can see how through Medicaid, in the numbers we FOIA'd in the state of Connecticut, that these children are on multiple cocktails of psychiatric drugs. So they're feeding these kids multiple diagnoses. So you need a diagnosis. It's not just the drug companies, it's the psychs.
Okay.
So it's, yeah.
Okay. So the pipeline is, your kid is a little squirmy, and then the school says you need something. Do they then defer to refer you to DCS immediately? What does that process look like?
That process looks like anybody can call in and say, like your neighbor, you can call in and say, I believe my
Neighbor?
neighbor.
I'm
Yeah, you could say, I believe my neighbor is abusing their kids.
okay.
And so you call the police station, the police come out, and you get now a police report. And then DCF gets involved, and because they're mandatory reporters, the police.
Okay.
So that is one chain. The school can say, we believe this child is suffering from abuse. And so that's another way. They're all anonymous phone calls.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's how it starts. And then DCF gets involved. And, a news article just came out today, and you can find it on Able Child's website on our Facebook, about this Connecticut's audit of DCF. One of the big things Able Child did was, when we passed that first initial bill in Connecticut, they were required to track how many children were on psychiatric drugs in state care. It's something they really have never really lived up to.
Oh,
And this audit recently that just came out, it shows that they're missing kids. They've basically failed the audit.
okay. So when you say audit, do you mean that they've actually let you know how many kids are on these drugs? Or have they, when you say they failed the audit, does that just mean they just didn't give you the information?
Well, they failed the audit on multiple levels.
Mm,
Okay, so it's like the state goes in and they audit how they're caring for the children. One of the biggest things that they're still missing uh, part is the data of how many children are on psychiatric drugs.
okay, so they didn't actually give you that piece of information.
No, they don't give that information. You could strip
They're
the
supposed
identity.
to, but they're not.
Yes, they're supposed to, by public law 0124, they are supposed to track how many children are on these psychiatric drugs, and continually keep the legislators involved and make sure that they know how many children are on these psychiatric drugs. So they can make laws to protect these children. But right now, there's no watchdog.
Okay. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. It's throughout the country. So we started to work on that. Able Child provided Diane Sawyer. She did a 1 year long investigation into the drugging of foster care children.
Okay.
And we provided Diane Sawyer with a whistleblower, an attorney, and also my organization went into did a spot check on Riverview Psychiatric Facility in Connecticut,
Hmm.
and we were handed the RX, the amount of psych drugs that they were giving these children in this facility, and we gave that to Diane Sawyer as well. The psychiatric facility was going to be shut down, but they ended up renaming the facility versus shutting it down.
Wow. Okay. Well, you know what? Honestly, I keep thinking that I should be surprised by the awful things I'm learning, and I'm just not. I wish I were surprised, but I'm not. So,
Very profitable. It is corruption. It's pretty evil because these children are depending on the state to take care of them. The state is the parent. So
mhm,
you really don't have informed consent because the state basically gives this huge contract to the behavioral health vendor, and then the vendor has basically that child's mind in their hand,
mm.
and they really have not been a good caretaker of these children.
So how many do you know how many children there are in foster care in Connecticut?
Well, it varies, but basically, Able Child was live on a CTN. That's, I guess, the television network that covers the legislative sessions up at the Capitol. We were live on air with the Behavioral Health Oversight Committee. Now, they're the watchdogs. And so we were going over the numbers of the children, of the drugging of these children, and the different age groups, as young as 0, newborns being drugged on multiple drugs. And our mic was cut off, and we were shut down right on live television. So the numbers that we FOIA'd, I don't have them in front of me, but you can find them on Able Child's website. We've written multiple articles about it.
Okay. Um, so what are you working on right now?
So we went from working into the foster care. First, it started with my own son, then we went into the foster care, and then now I work on mass killings across the country. The first one I ever worked on was the Sandy Hook
Hmm.
mass killing,
Oh,
trying to
you mean
get.
like the psychiatric drug involvement with that?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So that's what we're working on throughout the country. We just finished up some work in Tennessee. There was the mass killing at the Covenant um, school, and we tried to get the toxicology report in all these killers,
Mhm.
and we've been denied that. So we created a law with another organization, Amy Miller, who works, pretty close with Bobby Kennedy's group.
Mhm.
Uh, and so we crafted language to pull the blood from the deceased shooter that would determine therapeutic levels of psychiatric drugs. And it's the first of its kind in the country. So it's a landmark piece of legislation. And so we're trying now to work on that with the state of Wyoming.
Okay. So this is something the thing with the psychiatric drugs. I mean, I remember hearing about that about, I think I started hearing about that maybe 10 years ago, something like that. Does that seem accurate? Is that when you first started? How did that come up for you?
Well, in 2012 is when we were working on the Sandy Hook police report. The day of the incident, our organization emailed the state police and the governor a list of all the other killers that were on psychiatric drugs. So that was 2012.
Hmm.
We've been working diligently since then. I mean, you might have seen some of my work nationally on Sandy Hook, um, trying to help the gun manufacturers. We've done PSAs saying it's not the guns, it's the psychiatric drugs. So it's very hard when you have the government already producing a narrative.
Mm.
And so you're kind of swimming upstream. So we've been working on this for a very long time, sure.
Yeah. So what's so are you working with any of the vaccine stuff? And how about the trans issues, which is obviously that is a huge thing to do with uh I ran out of words. I'm sorry. Um, conformed consent. That's
Yeah,
like,
very good questions. We have, after COVID, our work was kind of exploded when
mhm,
people were researching and they saw the word informed consent, because that's our mission statement. So we were getting a lot of inquiries about the vaccinations. So we have written about autism. We just put out an article about it, how the psychiatric industry expanded the term.
oh,
So if you hear the term, oh, he's on the spectrum,
uh-huh.
that means that they can capture more children to diagnose.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the details of that? Like how did they expand that? What was this behavioral? Was this they said, oh, if you do X, Y, and Z, and now they added on, MNLOP? Is that what we're
Yeah.
talking about here?
Very similar. So where we intersect with the vaccination people that are concerned about vaccinations is that there's a group of children that are severely harmed. Something is causing their condition. And we've never, we're not scientists, we're parents, we work on informed consent. We don't deny that there's something going on with these children, right? Where we intersect is that all these children that are harmed, whether it is through the vaccination, whether it's through something in the environment, something has damaged these children's neurological beings, right? And it's most of the time it's physical. I mean, you've heard of the Down syndrome, and it used to be in the very beginning called mental retardation,
Right.
right?
I
So there,
remember that time.
what?
I said, I remember that time.
Right. And so oh, you can't say that. So it became, that's a really bad thing to say. But as they were changing these names, they were expanding the names. So now we have mentally ill. that's a very general term.
Yes.
So these children that are autistic or damaged from the vaccinations are being diagnosed by not doctors, but psychiatrists. So the psychiatrist is looking at a child's behavior, and there no blood tests, no brain scans, none of that. They are looking at these children through a subjective eye that it can change.
Mm.
So that's where we try to educate, like the likes of Secretary Kennedy, who were saying, listen, it's the diagnosis process. It's the industry of psychiatry that is labeling these children and lumping them all together, and nobody's benefiting because they've expanded and watered down mental illness to the point that everybody has it. So
Yes.
their market is never ending, and the children aren't getting better. I mean, one of the reports early on that I got from the state of Connecticut was, I was just reading it to an investigative reporter I work with, and it's like this mentally retarded, because it was back then, was in a nursing home for 14 years and had 5 different diagnoses, was
Mm.
on multiple drugs and choked to death. These are, this is not the way we treat people who have mental health issues, whether it's being severely mentally retarded, being whatever the label is, where you just drug them up and give them a bunch of labels and then pay the vendor at the end of the day. And I think the state of Connecticut and the entire country refuses to hold these experts accountable. I mean, the drug companies have been held to account to a certain extent.
Mhm.
They have put a black box warning on their drugs saying it increases the risk of violence, not violence, of suicide, which is a violent act. It's
Yeah.
killing oneself, right? So that's a violent act. But the psychiatrists and the contracts continue to fly under the radar. And
Mm.
that's what Able Child's trying to do, is educate people on these contracts. Like the Parkland shooter, he was drugged through foster care, and the adoption process on a cocktail of drugs. And then he no longer on these drugs, but he now is a drug addict
Mm.
going for bars of Xanax before the killing. And the vendor, Henderson Behavioral Health, is a huge contractor who was in charge of his drugging. They walked away scot-free.
Mm.
You
How old,
know,
do you know how old he was when this happened?
he was in his early 20s.
Okay.
He was, and this is the case. These are children that have been on multiple drugs over, that have never been researched
Yeah.
on children. Like, you know, let's say, just 3 psychiatric drugs that you mix together have never been tested on a human being in a clinical drug trial. It's called off-label prescribing.
Okay.
So we have no idea how those drugs perform in a human developing mind of a 7-year-old that's drugged all the way up to 20.
Let alone how they interact together.
Exactly.
So, yeah,
Mm.
my experience, I have some extensive experience with the mental health system myself. I have a family member who was always challenged and then ended up with a schizophrenia diagnosis in early 20s, as often happens. That's often when that shows up. Um, my long-term irritation with the psychology, the psychiatric system as a whole, from the time I was pretty young. I had a friend who attempted suicide, and she was in a locked ward, and I went and visited her in that locked ward, and I was like, "Is this really the best way to approach this?" And I was skeptical, and I think there's a lot of different causes for the mental health, because we have a mental health crisis, as you said. It's like they keep expanding the idea of how sick we are. It's like, what does this even mean? It's like, oh, I'm a little anxious. Oh, well, you've got a mental illness. Okay, then. Here, let's give you a drug. And I know I was offered drugs as a younger person and I turned them down. They offered me Thorazine at one point. And I was like, no, let's not do this. And I think that was one of the better decisions I ever made in my life. Is like, was I struggling? Now, as an adult, I know why I was struggling. But back then, it was much more to do with my culture. And we have so much in our culture that's broken. And I think, do you read Jordan Peterson at all?
No.
He's a psychologist. He's a Canadian psychologist, but he talks a lot about how mental health is it's completely part of our relationship with other people, and that you can't really separate it from that, and that we have focused deeply on what's inside of us as if we can change what's inside of us and that's going to fix things. And it's really more about how we interact with other human beings. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I was very isolated growing up, and our culture is very isolating right now in a way that it wasn't even, 50 years ago.
Well, the never-ending client base that they get is based on the fact that anything can cause mental health issues, right? Because there's no blood test, there's no brain scan. So yeah, I mean, you can go through your family could be, your parents can go through divorce, and that can be devastating for a child. There's a million things that can happen with children. Reading, one of the biggest things I found with the children that have been labeled ADHD
Mhm,
is that it mirrors the same as the gifted. So a lot of children that are gifted and bright
mhm,
are diagnosed ADHD. Well, that's a crime against our country because we need these children
mhm,
to be our scientists and have that critical thinking. But if you're drugging that child, they can no longer, they become brain damaged. Once you start giving a child Ritalin and Paxil, then you're altering their minds. So it's very likely that they never become normal again. They rely on it. They become, I mean, the Berkeley study says that it's a gateway drug, to addiction. So the children that I have found that have been diagnosed with ADHD and have usually had reading issues like sequencing, and
mhm,
a lot has been done for dyslexia, which again, I think that the psychiatric industry has tried desperately to grab that label.
mhm,
And they are not, in my opinion, there's in the school systems, they have a monopoly.
mhm,
There's no other expert in there that says you can come to us and we're going to test your reading, writing, and psychiatry has taken over our school system. So, and it's taken over our political system and everything. It's in everything. And so it's it's a massive problem in our country because 1 in 4 Americans are on a psychiatric drug, and it's continuing to grow. And human rights, it's not only that these drugs are dangerous, but we also have you know just so many challenges health wise of the side effects. But we don't have a creative nation anymore. That's what I see. I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around it.
mhm,
uh, and more legislation needs to be done. And it simply isn't going to happen because they're entrenched. The psychiatric industry and drug industry is entrenched within the political system. It just is.
Do you think that's mostly because of the schools and the grip the schools have?
I think that it's the schools are a captured audience, right? So the fact that psychiatry has made its way into the school system, and this has really happened in the 70s.
Hmm.
When my mother was growing up, it was very rare. Nobody was mentally ill the way people are now, like we talk about this crisis. So they had this foothold into the school system and the foster care system. So there's two ways to control a society. One is through birth, young children, right? You want to mold them.
Hmm.
And the other one is through death. And this is the one that Able Child looks at a lot, is that if you have a death certificate, you have to decide how that child died or that adult died. It's, what caused the death. That's why autopsies and toxicology reports are so critical, because
Hmm.
they can help us shed light on what's happening to a generation of children. And not only who benefits after each one of these killings, these mass killings, they get more mental health funding.
Hmm.
And so, and they're really in our prison system. Our prison system, it's just disgusting. It's everywhere. It's really overwhelming. I don't know why I picked this particular issue to work on in my lifetime. I just don't know, because it's
Big challenges.
been big challenges,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
do what I can. We've had some wins. I'm realistic. They're not gonna, the drug companies aren't going away. I have no issue actually with the drug companies, because they disclose pretty much on their drug that it increases the risk of suicide. That was not only my organization, but parents, victims that got that black box suicide warning on the
Okay.
box,
Now,
right?
was that legislation or was that just everybody like yelling at them loudly?
That's a really good question. It was actually going to the FDA, parents holding up signs of their kids,
Okay.
and the FDA advisory panel put a black box suicide warning on the drugs. And that really kind of brought the issue up and out, that people are now discussing. I think that was the biggest turning point. It's almost like cigarettes, the government was very involved in cigarettes, it was everywhere, it was in all the ads, all the movies. And now we know it causes cancer, right?
Right.
That's really where we need to be with these psych drugs. We need to, if you watch a show, you can hear them say, some of these, any show, oh, that person stopped taking their meds,
Yeah.
we we need to get that out of the conversation, because that's simply not true. That's not why the person died,
Right.
or is acting out.
Right.
Could be
Yeah.
the drug itself. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do.
Maybe we need to go and petition the the uh, the physicians associations.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. I mean, there's really so much more that needs to be done on the issue.
Hmm.
Able Child's just a small organization. We are really tiny. We have a big voice, but we're very, very tiny. And we're not funded. But the beautiful thing is, we're not funded by the state or federal government.
Well, yes,
So
that's definitely a plus.
it is, because I'm not afraid of somebody saying, we're not going to give you this funding, you
Hmm.
know, because you're speaking out on informed consents, so that has been a benefit. Connecticut's been a real challenge. It's a very interesting state, because it's a one-party state.
Hmm.
It's really, it's a failed state. When you kick human rights organizations out of your state, like they did Able Child, when I'm trying to help and I'm trying to
Okay.
educate, and they say your voice is not welcome here, um, how do you treat these children? How do you move on from there? And again, it's a one-party system. So no matter how much you blame the Democrats, you have to say what's going wrong with the Republicans, that they have given all these seats away. And
Oh, yeah, we've talked. That's one of the things Connecticut Common Sense has been trying to address is
good.
is trying to reclaim the Republican Party. And I think they've got some enough pressure on them, maybe because, Jason made a run at the chairmanship, and that might have gotten just enough sunlight that they're starting to look at some things that they were not looking at before, like election integrity, for example. That was just in their recent newsletter, and they absolutely have been ignoring that with enthusiasm. So,
Well, that's how I met Jason is, Able Child was up here. And the reason why I came to Connecticut was because they pulled the plug on my organization on this behavioral health oversight committee. And I was like, there's some corruption going. I'm gonna just put it out there. You
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah, that was good. That was
Yeah, so I wish everybody in Connecticut a lot of blessings. I don't know how, a party can survive that has no, I mean, with the recent chairman's position, how you can have no power in your own state. You have no voice because you don't have any clout within the state, and then you send these horrible candidates around into DC, and I don't know. It's a mess
yeah, yeah,
on both sides of the aisle. I'm a
yeah,
nonpartisan issue. I'm a human rights
yes.
organization. So I don't personally dislike either party. I, I just see the children, this cycle. I don't know if you've ever read that book, Oliver Twist.
Oh, I
You
saw
know,
the movie when I was a kid. So,
it sticks in my mind. It's like,
mhm.
It just, what are we doing to these children over decades?
Yes.
So
Yeah, it's my stepson is he was diagnosed with ADD, and my husband, and as a matter of fact, I'm in Maine right now, and my teacher up here is 90 miles an hour. I mean, these are people that are just like the brains are going this way and that way and all over the place, and there ain't nothing stupid about any of these people. My teacher here, he's got his own business. He's been running this business for 30 years. My husband is a perfectly successful electrician and musician, and he's in demand, and he's actually in the Connecticut Music Northeast, the Northeast Music Hall of Fame. So, he's totally smart guy, a little scattered at times, little disorganized, but there's nothing dumb about him. And my stepson works for Electric Boat. Um, and he is well loved by his coworkers because he's a very efficient, competent young man. So this ADD thing is, and his parents, my stepson, my husband and his ex, they were like, no, we don't want to drug our son. And so, he, grew up relatively, I mean, and he had some other things going on as well, but they were like, no, we don't want to put drugs in him. And so he's functional and he's not angry. He's not violent. So this is all good. But as you talk about how hard this is pushed. And I think this was probably when they were just starting to push this because, once my husband and his ex pushed back, they left him alone. And, my stepson, he knew what he wanted to do and he went off and did it. But yeah, it kind of blows my mind how much they want to jam this down people's throats. And
there's money involved. So if your son or your stepson or your daughter is gifted
Mhm.
And it's usually a mind that is multitasking, is a brilliant mind. And there's ways, there's mind mapping, there's SRAs, there's reading skills, there's all these wonderful tools that these children are not getting. And if there was money attached to that, believe me, they'd be ramming it down your throat. But the smart pill was invented in Nixon era,
Mhm.
and they think that this pill is going to make these children something that they're not. It's a human rights issue. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know what they did to the doctors at Nuremberg.
Mhm.
And I gotta say that some of this stuff that's happening now is like I hesitate to say some of those things just because it's like, do you really want to talk about executing people? But it's horrific. It's unhuman what these
It
doctors are
is
doing.
unhuman. And the whole thing with the gender, when you that is all coming from psychiatry. There's groups of parents that, and I don't blame any, I try to work with everybody, I really do. But getting rid of certain books in a school is not necessarily the answer. It's low-hanging fruit. You have to go up higher to the Behavioral Health Oversight Committee that are making these decisions in each state. It's the actual committee. And
Mhm.
I think that people don't realize that the gender issue comes from psychiatry. They're very quiet on, they're experts telling us all about ADHD and bipolar and all these things and gender dysphoria, but they don't come out when their treatment goes horribly wrong, like the one in Tennessee. And that was experimental treatment on a human being that came from the psychiatric industry. Psychiatry does not have a good reputation.
Mhm.
And it's okay not to believe in it. It's okay to say, you're not my expert. And that's what I kind of see as the future for the school systems, is it's not about banning books, or, it is great to be on the board of ed and tell, but I really think it's a higher level of these behavioral health, this psychiatry that's influencing the lawmakers. We have to get to that level, and break up that monopoly. And that's where I see where, the gifted child comes back. You have a choice. If you had a choice in the school system of one door that said ADHD and another one that said gifted, this ADHD came with psych drugs and suicide, increased risk of violence. And this came with tools and creative means,
Mhm.
art, music,
Right.
dance. Which one would you pick?
Yeah, that's a
Um,
no-brainer.
right? Yeah, so we have a lot of work ahead of us. I think that your work, I think that it's amazing the way the vaccination people have really joined forces with all different other groups. I mean, Robert Kennedy's doing a great job, I believe, in getting some of this conflict of interest out of the FDA.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of exciting things happening, but the mass killings, really, we have to get down to the autopsy reports and the ballistics
Mhm.
reports and find out who's doing this to the kids, because I believe that it's a combination of mind control with these games
Mm.
that um like Fortnite, not that there it's a bad game, but you have individuals that could come into your home that you don't even know on
Mm.
these games with children, and then they're on a boatload of psych drugs.
Yeah.
So some of these kids could actually think that they're participating in a game, and
Yeah,
they're
yeah, the brain
fed
doesn't work that way. The brain sees this stuff and just calculates it like it's real. And it's like you can, as adults, and it's probably different for those of us who grew up without the internet.
up.
But this is, and it's like I remember Pong. So
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it was these little things that moved back and forth and you could bounce a ball off them. That was, so it's like, oh, well, that's cool. Now it just looks real. I mean, even something like movies and one of the things I do is I write fiction. And when you're reading fiction, what happens in your brain is you are being that person. And for a reader, that can be a useful thing. But most people aren't reading. You go into a screen and you're seeing it visually. That's a different ball game than reading. You process stuff different. And it's like, I don't play video games, but I could see how that could become very problematic after a
Yeah, I don't play them either, but I definitely see that. And having raised two boys,
while.
I remember going up to my son's room and saying, "Who are you talking to?" And he's like, "I'm just talking to some guy." I'm like, "Yeah, no, this doesn't work for me. Some
Wow.
guy is not coming into my house to
Yeah.
play this game with you, you know?" So I think parents have to be really mindful of what's coming into their house through these games, and if there's anything I could do to help in Connecticut, I'm ready to do it. But I do believe it is a failed state right now, on the verge of bankruptcy. And I love Connecticut, so I want to see better for Connecticut. I just don't see how it's ever going to survive with the amount of problems it has now. But that's not for me to solve. I have to I have to know
You got
when
to
to.
focus. You've got a really big piece there.
Yeah.
Are there any other organizations that are like yours in the country that you know of?
There's the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. They're really a watchdog that have been around for over 25 years. So they're really good. There's also Mad in America is
Mhm.
a really good website. They always have really brilliant articles on their website. So there are organizations and different groups that have been working on this together. And when something happens, we usually connect together and try to piece it together. It's a very small cottage industry of what I do. There's no money in it. Okay, I'm gonna tell you that right up front. There's no money. It comes from a passion, but everybody does know one another.
Mhm.
And we've built up reputations that we do work well together. And it crosses all party lines, which is amazing.
Yeah, as
Uh,
it should. As it should.
it's amazing, I mean, I've worked actually before things really turned bad in Connecticut. I actually did a lot of my work with Democrats. So I work with anybody who's willing
Mhm.
to look at this issue honestly and to get the drug formulas out of foster care, because believe me, you know, it's terrible that they have this list of drugs that they can prescribe to children just because they're in foster care. It's terrible. It breaks my heart, to see. And I think a lot of them end up homeless, foster care children.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Well,
really do.
if you have no capacity to engage in reasonable work that's going to earn you enough money, especially in Connecticut, where the housing prices are ridiculous, you know, it, unless you're willing to have a roommate. And the problem is that once you start having psychological problems of any kind, it then becomes that much harder to deal with something like a roommate.
Yeah,
And I
I
mean,
mean,
I've seen a lot of that too. It's like, oh my God, my roommate did X, Y, and Z and put soap in my coffee pot. And, you get somebody who's disturbed and vengeful. And no, you're not keeping a roommate under those circumstances.
right. I mean, this is the mind-altering drugs that people are on, and you have to teach people how to survive in this world. And by drugging them and multiple drugs over a matter of time, their brains can no longer function. So
Hmm.
you have a veal cutlet, and you have somebody who's just um, a zombie that is really being fed these drugs by the drug companies. And you know what they have NAMI. You asked me about organizations that are like-minded, like Able Child. There's the other ones that we're dealing with, like the National Alliance of the Mentally Ill, that's actually funded by the drug companies. So
Wow.
they're a and they get these parents that are on boatloads of drugs, and their kids are on boatloads of drugs, and they're very, very,
Hmm.
very hard to have a conversation with. It's very difficult to communicate with a NAMI person or a NAMI member because they've really been fed just such a load of lies. It's hard.
Have you had any, do you have any, have you talked to any people who have like come around to this point of view, who have changed their mind, like that um, they thought the drugs were fun, like you started out as, but you weren't really like on board with this at the start, but have you met anyone who was on board with it and then said, whoa, wait a minute, what's happening here?
Yeah, actually, a lot of my sons, the parents that my children grew up with, they have come to me, several of them, and said you were right,
Okay.
where they really gave me a hard time. I was from a very affluent town where I was really put out to pasture by these parents. Was no longer invited to coffees.
Mhm.
I was told, one parent actually called me up and told me, you need to put your kid on these psych drugs. So I would say, now my kids have remained friends and grown up with them, and I've run into a couple of the parents who appreciate my work, and their kids have had difficult times. And so, yeah, and then there's parents who come on Able Child, and they have come around. Their kids have been harmed,
Mhm.
so, and we're always there. I don't judge you if you've
Mhm.
put your kid on psych drugs or you take psych drugs. I just want to make sure you have all the information possible. And quite frankly, an exit plan if you want to get off these drugs. That is a really big thing we're pushing in the coming year,
Okay.
is an exit plan. The state and federal government have to start setting up these exit plans for these families who have been lied to and told they had chemical imbalances, or that now are lifetime clients of big pharma. So, exit plans are really important, but a lot of parents come, a lot of people have signed our petition for federal hearings, that have lost kids
Oh.
from these psych drugs, induced suicides, from the withdrawals, or the getting onto the drugs. It's like Russian roulette. So I've seen a lot of parents. I've reached out. I always try to do a personal note
Mhm.
to anybody who comes to me, and I try to answer all the emails. I almost put myself out there, quite frankly, a little too much. But it's because I want to help. But again, if you choose the path of psychiatric drugs, I just want you to be safe,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. So is there anything you want to add? Have we covered all the bases here?
You really did great. I know I talk a lot. I just would ask people to support federal hearings into the link between psychiatric drugs and these mass killings. You could go on our website at ablechild.org and sign the petition. And we just put out a letter to our members, which is free. Um, I do not overload people with emails. Like if you get an email once a year from me, I would say that's really a lot. So basically, you could sign the petition, you could donate, but I'm here. Not going away. I hope to be working on this issue continually. And I really just hope for the best for all children that are in state care and all people who have been forced onto these drugs and lied to because they've spent a lot of their time, you know, imprisoned and now they're trying to get off these drugs. I just want it to be safe. So I want federal hearings. So if you could sign the petition, it would be great.
Great. We will definitely put Able Child in the links. And if there's any other organizations you would like us to add, just let me know and we'll make sure that that's in the show notes. And it was a real pleasure to have you. So thank you so much for sharing your work. This is really important and it is a totally nonpartisan issue. And we should
Totally.
all be concerned about this. This is,
I
it's an issue of health. And I don't think mental health is mental health. Mental health is health.
That's right. It's
Separate.
yes, I agree. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And my best to you guys in your podcast and everything Connecticut.
Oh, thank you so much.
All righty.
Good night.